The war had been raging for over a century. Across the endless black expanse, fleets clashed, planets were scorched, and entire civilizations crumbled under the weight of an unrelenting, pointless conflict. The cause had long since been forgotten, buried beneath layers of propaganda and bloodshed. The Great Galactic Accord had fallen, splintering the once unified races of the galaxy into warring factions. On one side stood the Vicar Dominion, a militaristic species of towering reptilian warriors whose empires stretched across a third of the known galaxy. Their bodies were thick with armored plates, their minds sharpened by centuries of war. Opposing them, the Syndicate of Allied Worlds, an uneasy coalition of over 100 species, bound together only by their mutual hatred of the Vicar. The balance of power had shifted countless times, either side capable of achieving a decisive victory. And then, the humans arrived. They hadn't been part of the war. In fact, they hadn't even been part of the galactic stage until recently. A late addition to the interstellar community, humanity had only just established contact with the wider galaxy. They were small, insignificant in number compared to the great empires that had been warring for centuries. No one had paid them much attention. That was a mistake. General Harkonnen of the Vicar Dominion stood aboard the bridge of the warship Relentless Fang, his emerald eyes scanning the battlefield unfolding before him. "The humans have deployed," his tactical officer rumbled, a nervous edge to his voice. Harkonnen didn't understand the fear. He had seen the reports. Humans were a minor species, barely a blip on the galactic scale. Their military technology was primitive compared to the Dominion's war fleets. Their ships were small, unassuming, cobbled together with mismatched designs that betrayed their lack of experience in space. And yet something about them unnerved his officers. "Their numbers?" Harkonnen asked. "Less than a battalion, General," the officer responded, tapping at his holopad. "The Syndicate deployed them to the front line as a desperate maneuver." Harkonnen bared his teeth in amusement. The Syndicate was running out of options. That much was clear. They were throwing whatever they had into the grinder, hoping for a miracle. It was pathetic. "Open a channel to the fleet. We strike now." The Vicar fleet surged forward, capital ships tearing through the void, weapons charging. Their sheer firepower dwarfed anything the Syndicate could hope to muster. It was a slaughter before it had even begun. And then, something happened. The humans moved. They didn't engage like the others. The Vicar had studied Syndicate battle tactics for decades. They knew the formations, the responses, the patterns. But the humans, they did something completely unexpected. Instead of meeting the Vicar head-on in a suicidal charge, they vanished. Not with cloaking technology. Vicar sensors would have picked up even the faintest energy signature. No, they disappeared through sheer maneuverability, their ships darting like insects through the battlefield, slipping through gaps in the Vicar formation with an uncanny precision. What are they doing?" Harkonnen muttered. The answer came in the form of chaos. Vicar's ships began dropping offline, not from direct engagement, but from sabotage. Entire battlecruisers were suddenly left adrift, their engines disabled. Communications flickered. Targeting systems went haywire. The humans weren't fighting a conventional battle. They were playing a different game entirely. On board the Havoc, Captain Elias Carter grinned as he watched the chaos unfold. "Right on schedule," he said. His crew had spent weeks analyzing Vicar battle patterns, and they had quickly identified a flaw: arrogance. The Vicar relied on brute force and overwhelming firepower. They didn't expect finesse. They didn't expect strategy. They didn't expect humans. Elias leaned forward, tapping his communicator. "Squad 3, how's it looking?" A voice crackled in response. "Like a butcher shop. They didn't even lock their secondary comm relays." "We're in." Elias smirked. The Vicar had built their fleet to destroy planets, to wipe out civilizations. But they hadn't built it to counter human ingenuity. He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire the decoys." A volley of false signatures burst forth, mimicking the energy output of a dozen Syndicate capital ships. The Vicar took the bait, shifting their formations to counter an enemy that didn't exist. And in that opening, the humans struck. Micro-torpedoes, precision-guided and carrying non-lethal electromagnetic payloads, slammed into Vicar ships. They weren't designed to destroy, they were designed to disable. One by one, the mighty warships of the Dominion fell silent, left adrift in the black void. Harkonnen watched in stunned disbelief. "This isn't possible," he hissed. "We outnumber them 100 to 1. But numbers didn't matter when the enemy refused to fight by the rules. Aboard the Havoc, Elias watched as the remaining Vicar forces hesitated. "Do we push?" his first officer asked. Elias shook his head. "No. We wait." The Vicar weren't stupid. They were warriors. And warriors understood fear. They understood when they had been outmaneuvered. Elias wasn't here to destroy them, he was here to send a message. Across the battlefield, Vicar commanders were making a choice. Some were trying to rally, barking orders into their failing calms. Others were falling back, retreating for the first time in the war's long history. And then, the first surrender signal appeared. Elias exhaled slowly. "That's one," he murmured. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, the unthinkable had happened. The Vicar fleet had surrendered. Not because they were outgunned. Not because they were outnumbered. But because they had realized something that sent a chill through the galaxy. The humans had arrived. And the war was over. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The surrender of the Vicar fleet had sent shockwaves across the galaxy, but it was only the beginning. The Dominion refused to accept the humiliation of defeat, and the Syndicate was just as wary of humanity's sudden and decisive victory. The balance of power had shifted, and now everyone wanted to know, what were the humans truly capable of? General Harkonnen sat in his war chamber, a massive circular room adorned with holographic battle maps. The loss at Kesra 9 had stunned the Dominion's high command, and whispers of fear spread through the ranks like a disease. A species that had only just emerged onto the galactic stage had dismantled an entire fleet without firing a single lethal shot. It was an insult the Dominion could not tolerate. Across from him, a massive figure loomed in the dim light, High Warlord Zathrex, supreme leader of the Vicar Dominion. "This must never happen again," Zathrex growled, his voice a deep rumble that sent vibrations through the floor. Harkonnen bowed his head. "I underestimated them. You all did." Zathrex's piercing yellow eyes narrowed. "These humans. They fight like no species we've ever encountered. They do not rely on brute force. They do not seek honor in combat. They fight asymmetrically." The word was practically a curse in Vicar culture. "They humiliated us," Zathrex continued, voice dark with fury. "And now, the Syndicate believes they have a secret weapon. We cannot allow this. We must force them into a battle where trickery will not save them." Harkonnen nodded, already understanding. "You wish to provoke them. I wish to break them," Zathrex corrected. On board the Havoc, Captain Elias Carter was already 3 steps ahead. The surrender of the Vicar fleet had been a turning point, but Elias knew that it wasn't a victory, it was a warning. The Dominion wouldn't simply retreat. They would come back harder, angrier, and more determined than ever. And they would come for him. He sat at the command table, surrounded by his officers. The holographic display flickered, showing incoming intelligence reports. "They're regrouping," his first officer, Lieutenant Saravas, said. "We've intercepted communications from their central command. They're furious." Elias leaned back, rubbing his chin. "Of course they are. They just lost without losing a single soldier. We embarrassed them," Voss said. Elias smirked. "And that's what makes them dangerous. They're not thinking strategically anymore. They're thinking emotionally. And emotional enemies make mistakes." Across the table, their cyber warfare specialist, Ryan Cale, frowned. "There's something else." He tapped the display, and a new set of data appeared. "They're setting a trap." Elias leaned forward. Cale continued. "A massive troop movement near the colony of Jexus 4. They're making it look like a standard planetary assault, but something about it feels off. The Dominion doesn't normally attack civilian outposts without a reason. It's bait. They want to force us into a fight we can't run from, Elias muttered. Voss nodded. They want a conventional engagement. No more trickery. No more sabotage. Just a straight-up battle. The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Elias grinned. Then let's give them a battle. The Dominion fleet arrived over Jexus 4 in full force, over 200 warships, each one bristling with weaponry. The skies darkened with the sheer mass of their fleet, blotting out the stars as they descended upon the colony world below. Harkonnen stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the unyielding Wrath. This time, there will be no illusions, he said coldly. No tricks. His second-in-command, a younger Vicar named Kor, nodded. The humans have no choice but to defend. The Syndicate cannot afford to lose Jexus 4. Harkonnen watched as his fleet assumed attack formation. They will come, he said. And when they do, we will crush them. Moments later, the human ships arrived. But there were only 10 of them. Harkonnen blinked. This is a joke. The Havoc led the charge, flanked by a ragtag group of mismatched vessels. Nothing about them looked intimidating, no massive warships, no planetary bombardment cannons, no overwhelming numbers. And yet, deep down, Harkonnen felt a creeping unease. Humans never fight fair, he muttered. All ships, weapons ready. Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the Havoc, watching as the Dominion fleet loomed ahead. Voss exhaled. We are so outgunned. Elias chuckled. Yup. Kale grinned. So, what's the plan? Elias tapped the holomap. They want to fight? Fine. We'll give them a fight. He turned to the comms officer. Send the message. Across the battlefield, Dominion commanders received a single transmission from the Havoc. A simple phrase, translated into their language. Come and get us. Then, the human ships vanished. Not through cloaking. Not through jump drives. They simply moved. Faster than anything the Dominion had ever seen, the human ships darted between battle lines, weaving through formations in impossible patterns. They didn't engage directly. They didn't fire broadside barrages. They hunted. A Dominion warship locked onto the Havoc, only for its targeting systems to fail. Seconds later, its engines were disabled by a pinpoint EMP strike. Another warship tried to open fire, only for a human vessel to slip beneath it, attach a series of explosive drones, and dart away before the captain even realized what had happened. One by one, the Dominion ships fell into chaos. This isn't war, Harkonnen snarled, slamming his fist against the control panel. This is madness. His fleet had prepared for a traditional battle, for a clash of might. Instead, they had walked into a storm of human ingenuity, where every expectation was shattered. Elias Carter grinned as another enemy ship went dark. Remind me, Voss said. What did we call this maneuver again? Kale smirked. The panic attack. Harkonnen watched in horror as his fleet crumbled. They hadn't just been outmaneuvered. They had been outthought. And for the first time in his life, he understood. The humans weren't just different. They were the end of war itself. The Dominion was in disarray. Reports flooded in from every sector, ships disabled, battle groups shattered, entire fleets rendered useless before they could even engage properly. It wasn't just a defeat. It was a complete unraveling of the Vicar war machine. And yet, despite the losses, despite the sheer chaos, General Harkonnen refused to retreat. Not this time. His pride had already been wounded at Kesra 9. He would not let the humans humiliate him again. As his flagship, the unyielding Wrath, drifted among the wreckage of his once mighty armada, Harkonnen's mind raced. The humans were unpredictable, chaotic, and devastatingly effective in unconventional warfare. Every attempt to fight them on traditional terms had failed. So he would have to abandon tradition. For the first time in Vicar history, a Dominion fleet commander would fight like a human. On the Havoc, Captain Elias Carter frowned at the latest reports. They're not retreating? Voss asked. Elias shook his head. No. And that's what worries me. The Dominion never refused to cut their losses. They were warriors, but they weren't suicidal. Their honor was tied to victory, not senseless sacrifice. And yet, here they were, holding their position, regrouping, and preparing for another round. Kale scratched his head. This doesn't make sense. We've crippled half their fleet. Their comms are in disarray. They should be running for the nearest jump point. That's what they should be doing, Elias muttered. But they're not. Voss's eyes narrowed. You think they've figured us out? Elias exhaled slowly. I think they're about to do something very stupid. On the bridge of the unyielding wrath, Harkonnen finalized his plan. The humans expect us to fight with brute force, he said, addressing his command staff. We will not. The surviving Dominion warships shifted into a loose, scattered formation, something no Vicar fleet had ever done before. They powered down their main weapons. They stopped broadcasting commands. And one by one they vanished into the debris field. Elias watched from the havoc, a sinking feeling growing in his gut. They're gone, Kale muttered, disbelief in his voice. They just disappeared. They're playing dead, Elias realized. They're adapting. Voss looked at him. What do we do? Elias clenched his jaw. We find them before they find us. The battlefield was silent. No explosions. No weapons fire. Just floating wreckage, drifting corpses, and the ominous void. The Havoc and its squadron moved cautiously through the debris field, scanners sweeping for any sign of active Vicar ships. They're here, Elias murmured. Somewhere. And then, the trap was sprung. From the wreckage, Dominion ships lunged forward, weapons igniting in a perfectly coordinated ambush. Elias barely had time to react before the Havoc took a direct hit. Klaxons blared. The ship shuddered violently. They got through our ECM systems, Kale shouted. They jammed us back. The Dominion ships had learned. They weren't chasing. They weren't posturing. They were hunting. The humans had shown them how to fight dirty. And now, the Dominion was returning the favor. Elias pulled himself back into his chair, shaking off the impact. So that's how it's gonna be, huh? He grinned through the pain. Fine. Let's see who adapts faster. The Havoc lurched violently as another blast struck its hull. Sparks showered from overhead panels, and warning klaxons screamed through the bridge. The Dominion had learned. They had adapted. And now, for the first time, the humans were on the defensive. Voss clung to her console. Shields at 20%. We can't take another direct hit like that. Kale's fingers flew across the tactical interface. They've jammed our targeting systems. We're flying blind. Elias Carter grinned through the chaos. Good. Voss turned to him, stunned. Good? We're about to get blown apart. Elias leaned forward. They think they've beaten us at our own game. They think they've figured out how we fight. But they're still thinking like soldiers. His grin widened. Let's show them how humans think. Kale's eyes lit up. You've got a plan. Elias tapped the control panel, bringing up a holographic overlay of the battlefield. The Dominion ships had scattered, using debris for cover, picking off human vessels one by one. It was working. Too well. They've gotten too confident, Elias said. They think they've cornered us. Voss frowned. Hate to break it to you, but they have. Only if we play by their rules. Elias spun the holomap, highlighting a dense cluster of wreckage in the middle of the battlefield. See that? Kale squinted. The debris field? What about it? Elias smirked. We're not in it. But we will be. General Harkonnen stood tall on the bridge of the unyielding wrath, watching as human ships struggled against his forces. He had done it. He had turned their own tactics against them. For the first time since this cursed war began, humanity was losing. And then, something changed. The Havoc and the remaining human ships suddenly broke formation, hard. Instead of retreating, they rushed straight for the densest part of the battlefield, weaving through wreckage at impossible speeds. "What are they doing?" Harkonnen growled. His second-in-command corps hesitated. It appears they're retreating into the debris." Harkonnen's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. "No. Not retreating. Baiting us." He stared at the tactical display. This was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. The humans were forcing themselves into a kill box, limiting their own maneuverability. They were making themselves vulnerable. All the Dominion had to do was pursue and finish them off. So why did it feel like they were walking into a trap? Harkonnen's instincts screamed at him to stop, to hold position, to think. But his pride wouldn't allow it. "Advance," he snarled. The Dominion ships surged forward, slipping into the debris field, hunting their prey. And then, the human fleet vanished. Not through cloaking. Not through technology. Through sheer, human insanity. Elias gripped the controls as the Havoc twisted through the wreckage, barely skimming past torn-apart hulls and floating debris. "They're taking the bait," Kale confirmed. "Time to spring the trap," Elias said. "Activate Operation Deadweight." Voss hit the switch. Throughout the battlefield, long-dormant Syndicate wrecks came to life. Not warships. Not active combatants. Just junk. Hundreds of derelict vessels, lifeless husks long since abandoned, suddenly burst into motion. Engines flickered online for the first time in decades. Cargo containers, broken weapons platforms, and shredded hulls moved, as if the battlefield itself was shifting. The Dominion ships, deep in pursuit, had no time to react. One by one, their ships were trapped. Harkonnen's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. "They've rigged the debris?" Throughout the battlefield, old derelicts, fitted with basic thrusters and remote guidance systems, were being herded. The humans had turned the wreckage into an obstacle course, and the Dominion had rushed straight into it. The once open battlefield was now a maze, and the Dominion's superior firepower was useless. Their ships, designed for large-scale engagements, were too big, too slow, too cumbersome. Elias leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "You wanted a brawl?" He grinned. "Welcome to the cage fight." The humans struck like ghosts. Ships darted from cover, hit a Dominion vessel with pinpoint strikes, then vanished again. The Havoc weaved between wrecks, baiting Dominion ships into tighter and tighter spaces, until they were trapped, unable to maneuver. Harkonnen's fleet was no longer an armada. It was prey. The battle didn't last much longer. One by one, Dominion ships were forced to surrender or be left helplessly adrift. They couldn't fight back. They couldn't move. And in the end, the Dominion, once the terror of the galaxy, was defeated. Not through firepower. Not through overwhelming numbers. Through sheer, reckless, human ingenuity. On the bridge of the Havoc, Voss let out a breathless laugh. "We actually did it." Kale collapsed into his chair. "I'm never sleeping again." Elias chuckled. "Told you. They can adapt all they want." He looked out at the wreckage, at the silent Vicar ships floating helplessly in the void. "But we'll always be ahead." At that moment, the Dominion High Command, reeling from their catastrophic defeat, made the only logical choice left. They surrendered. The war was over. Not because the humans had annihilated their enemies. Not because they had superior numbers or advanced technology. But because, for the first time in galactic history, the Vicar, and the entire universe, understood one undeniable truth. When humans arrive on the battlefield, the war ends.